Hey guys, let's talk about another one of the principles of design, and that is balance. And we could talk about actual balance, that certain things have weight, and you need to, um, disperse that weight in such a way that it will stand up and not fall over. For example, if you created a teapot, right, and ceramics, you threw a teapot on the wheel or whatever, but it kept falling over, it's not a very successful teapot. So you would need to be able to think how you could disperse the weight in such a way that it would work for the purpose that you meant it to fulfill. So that would be one thing that we could talk about. But today I kind of want to focus just a little bit more about the illusion or visual balance, that when we paint a picture or do something on a flat surface, we perceive that it has balance. There's a perception that there's a certain balance in the work. And there's two kinds that I want you to be able to identify. What I'll do is I'll put up a series of slides and ask you if it's symmetrical or asymmetrical. So let's talk about those two. Let's figure out what is the difference between symmetrical balance and asymmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance means that if we were to draw a line down the middle of the picture plane, it is virtually the same on either side. It basically has the same objects, the same weight dispersion on either side of that center line. This has been used throughout history a lot in the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance for religious works. But let me give you an example. Okay, this is a San Giovanni altarpiece by Giovanni Bellini. And as you can see, as we look at this, it's basically the same thing on two sides of an axis, right? So if I draw a line down the center of it, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3 figures there. There's 1, 2, 3 figures here. Obviously, the architecture is just split down the middle. It's the same on either side. We have 1, 2, 3 angels, right? So we got an angel here, an angel here, an angel split in half. The Madonna is fairly evenly dispersed on either side. The one thing that might make this a little bit off is the Christ child. But I say this is close enough that we would consider this a symmetrical image. Now, you may have another art teacher down the road that says it has to be exactly a mirror image on either side. But I don't go that far. I think if it's pretty dang close, we would go for it. Here's another example. Remember the other day I said architecture is so repetitive. A line down the center, boom, practically the same thing on either side. This is the delivery of the keys by the artist Perugino. And if we draw a line down the center, right? Building, building, this is pretty much in half, grouping, grouping. So we have largely the same thing on either side. That would be symmetrical. It's funny, we have some pretty interesting, strong aesthetics when it comes to symmetry. And today, I don't think any of us would have ever gone along with this. But when they were building this cathedral, it took, hundreds of years to build a Gothic cathedral, and so the last things they were doing were adding spires. So they built this spire, and by the time this one was done, there was a whole new style of architecture, the High Gothic. And so they said, well, let's build the other spire in this new High Gothic architecture. So they built that one, and so what would have been perfectly symmetrical all of a sudden is not. And it's kind of funny, like for us today, we would have never done that. Asymmetrical, on the other hand, means it's not the same thing on either side, but that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't feel balanced, that there's not a weight distribution amongst the objects within the picture, that it still feels relatively balanced. Now let's look at an example. So here's the old teeter-totter idea, right? If we look at the center of the teeter-totter, this side feels very, very heavy compared to this side. Think of yourself, you jump on a teeter-totter with your 5-year-old nephew or niece, and they're on this end. What can you do to balance that? Well, you can move in, right? That makes it heavier on the outside. When you pull something out to an edge of the picture plane, it automatically makes it feel heavier on that side. So even though it's not the same size, it has a tendency to feel heavier because it's out on the edge. What else could you do? Well, you could grab one of your other nephews or nieces and put them out there to help you balance the weight, right? Add another object or two till it feels like it's more balanced. White has a tendency to feel lighter than dark. So what could you do, right? You could just add darker objects, or you could make the lighter object bigger, right? You could add some dark over to the other side, whatever, but you could balance out by using lights and darks. Textures tend to weigh more than flat solids. So you just have to keep that in mind. What could you do? Well, we could, bring this in, pull that to the edge, but you could add a little textural piece over here, add another shape over here, or something like that. These are things that's interesting. You guys all do this just intuitively. I really wouldn't even have to go through all this with you. I'm just doing it to point it out to you. But if you were actually creating collages for me, you would do this when you laid the objects down, and you would know it just instinctively when you laid them down whether it was working or not. This Degas is a master of balance and asymmetrical balance in his work, so I pulled out a couple Degas for you to look at today. But if we draw a line down the center of this, right, like this, it's not the same thing on either side, but it feels a little bit more balanced, right? Now, there are more objects, larger objects on this side. So what do we do? Well, we'll pull her over and put part of her body on this side, right? And then over on here, we have a very large dark shape that helps to balance this side out. So he's doing those same things that we just talked about, right? He's adding a dark shape, moving a shape in, those sorts of things. If we add a line to this, obviously this is not perfectly balanced, but he does do something that really does help in this. Obviously it's heavier on this side because you have all the two figures over here, but he does a couple things that help to keep this from feeling like it's falling over. One is he brings a strong line, right, of her leg over to here, and then he creates this big dark shadow. Remember I said add dark, it feels heavy. And then he takes this watering can, and where does he put it? All the way to the edge, right? If this watering can was here, man, this thing would be in trouble. Okay, but he brought it and put it all the way to the edge. So even though I think it does still feel a little bit heavier over here, the fact that the girls are elevated and they're not down at the bottom, and that he's done these things over here really helps. It doesn't feel bad when you look at it. This is Luncheon of the Boating Party by Renoir. And once again, it's not the same thing on either side. There's a lot more figures over on this side. So let's draw that line down the middle. And what does he do? Well, number one, he draws a line down the middle. Let me go back and show you that again. He's given us the division line right there. And we put that line down the middle. And what does he do? Okay, we've got a lot of action and stuff going on over here. Lighter shape, not as heavy as darker shape, right? Bring her clear to the edge. This large shape, bring him clear over to the edge. Even though we got a lot of space in here, he pulls these two shapes clear out. And also he gets the girl, we've got this really strong line, and he gets this girl leaning on this railing, and that strong line pulls a lot of weight over on this side. And then remember what I said about texture? All of that texture around them helps to give this side more weight as well. Patterns up here will do that too. So those are different ways that you can create balance on a two-dimensional flat surface on a work of art. So asymmetrical, not the same thing on either side. Symmetrical, virtually the same thing on either side of a center axis. Okay, now you'll do this in a quiz, right? I'll put pictures up and then you'll tell me whether it's symmetrical or asymmetrical. Okay, you guys, have a great day.